Putin is more popular than ever in Russia. As Russia gets ready for the presidential elections that are scheduled for March of next year, Vladimir Putin is still playing the voglio non voglio game and has not announced his candidacy for re-election. However, the president's apparent resignation is nothing more than a farce, and barring any catastrophes, he is set to govern Russia for another 6-year term. And, as strange as it may seem to outside observers, the large-scale invasion of Ukraine has only served to strengthen its grip on power. The exact political image of Putin in Russia rests on the idea that he is an unstoppable war god, to whom no enemy can stand up. This is the core of his political persona. Aside from the various levels of power within Russia, both internal and external, as well as foreign heads of state, whether they be allies or enemies, the other social treasuries are kept secret. Instead, Putin wears the uniform of the Russian people, who seem ready to support him once again, without question, as if he were a god of war. It was partly determined at the end of Boris Yeltsin's era, when he managed to make it in a corrupt political scene, that Putin would not base his political persona on personal charisma, administrative acumen, or intellectual ability. This was a symptom of the times of chaos. This was a chaotic period, not because of liberal and market reforms, but because the reformists themselves quit halfway through, having been convinced that political and economic power was safely in their hands. Changes in Russia were made at the top. There was no big opposition political movement that could have imposed the reforms at the time. Someone who had promoted the reforms, rather than the opponents, was responsible for blocking them once political power and economic wealth were distributed. Contrarily, it was not a time of idealistic democracy in Russia, but rather the weakness of the federal power center. It has never been truly desired that freedom, a subtopredato of this state of things, be granted. Dov Dovrebesir Tolta. The cause becomes an existential threat. Yeltsin and Putin were both targeted by the two censure wars. The public was led to believe, according to the version proposed, that Russia was in danger and that they would have fought to protect it. However, the truth is that the Ceceno people were victims of one of the most shocking crimes committed by the state during the Soviet era. They were forcibly displaced to Central Asia. The elderly and newborns were placed on comfortable trains and sent to the east. While traveling, many members of the most vulnerable social groups lose their lives. The only way for the Ceceni to return to their homeland was for the central power in Moscow to degenerate. Therefore, the Cecena independence struggle was a logical consequence of Russian territorial dominance after the Soviet Union had permanently collapsed, but the leaders in Moscow have decided to turn the centennial into an existential threat to Russia herself, just as was done with Ukraine almost 2 decades ago. That is how, due to the very nature of the already established bellicose trajectory, Putin's political persona transformed into the dictator of war that we know and condemn today. A Buratino worn by a powerful man to cover his legs. The September 1999 attack, attributed to the Grozny government, which justified the Second Chechen War in the eyes of Russian public opinion, has been the subject of much speculation, which is likely to continue even after Putin leaves this world. The fact is that even before Putin was under scrutiny, the Russian central government had already chosen war as a cooperative political tool to achieve total control and destroy the developing Russian federalism, and aside from the fact that the terrorist attacks were nothing more than a setup, Putin had already been chosen by the Yeltsin clan and the few oligarchs who had enough power to choose the next president of Russia, including Boris Berezovsky, who was later killed in Gran Bretagna, and Yeltsin's grandson, Valentin Yumashev, who remained fidele. Once again, the security threat that had terrorized the country during the Soviet era has been rekindled by Yeltsin's war strategy. Putin fu celto cum uxasor di Yeltsin perch era considerato un uomini adeguati alla situazione, un fantastico che avrebbe desiderato portare I panni del uomo forte, esattamente cio che serviva a quel momento. The reformed Russian autocracy needed a war, but Putin needed it too. Maybe it was orchestrated by the FSB, or maybe it was the extremist Islamists from Chechnya who provided the necessary beautiful cases, not under the control of the Grozny government. However, in the eyes of the Russian public, the difference would not be very significant. It was already clear that war was necessary as a tool of government. Even if he had wanted to, Putin would never have been able to overcome the political image that the Second Chernobyl War crystallized.